Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's such a pleasure. Good afternoon online as well. So it's such a pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it, and I first want to start off by thanking Miss Bernadine Lewis for the invitation and the college as well, to be able to talk about my book, Belonging and Identity. And also, I do feel like it's really an honor to be a part of this class, in terms of talking about the Virgin Islands history, which is very, very important. And I believe that most, if not all of you are here because of the belonger status and the residency, and I know that is something that is deeply personal. So I'll give you a little background about myself. I actually started to write on Virgin Islands history about 12 to 13 years ago. And through that experience in doing my research, I produced my first book, Secret Code British Virgin Islands. I'm not sure how many of you have Secret Code or maybe have seen or heard about it. Well, yes. So that was my first book that I wrote. And after that, I also actually run for office in the general election as well. And without further ado, Belonging and Identity came up within that process. And maybe you've also seen I created a civic education series sometime last year. And out of that series, which touched on the 1976 Constitution and the 2007 Constitution, then came Belonger and Identity. So before I go on, I just want to say that my work is not one that is politically aligned, and it is not one that casts blame. This is about the Constitution, and it's, I know it is deeply personal when it comes to belonging and identity. So, what is the purpose of writing Belonging and Identity? The first purpose is to examine how constitutional change in the Virgin Islands has shaped belonging, identity, and civic participation over time. It is also to present constitutional concepts in clear, accessible terms and support informed understanding of belonging, identity, and legal rights. Belonging and identity also strengthens democracy by giving our people clarity and the tools to ask informed questions and to engage meaningfully in public debates. It also deepens our understanding of how rights evolve, how laws affect families, and how national identity is shaped in these Virgin Islands. And importantly, it supports informed engagement in discussions about constitutional development. So, and beyond understanding the structure, the conversation is also about empowerment of people. It's about helping ordinary people approach constitutional questions with clarity rather than confusion or misinformation. So, why civic education matters for the Virgin Islands? We want to have a public understanding of belonging, national identity, and self-determination, which, if you really think about it and you talk to maybe 5 different people, public understanding can vary immensely in the Virgin Islands. And it is also important for ensuring that family connections remain clear and stable across generations. And we also want to have a healthy and modern constitutional reform, which requires informed public participation. So I want to talk a little bit about my research methodology in writing Belonging and Identity. In terms of my approach, I approached it first, you heard I said, through a civic education exercise that I started last year. And I drew that based on constitutional context, historical development, universal human rights principles, comparative examples, and simply our lived experiences in the Virgin Islands. So let's talk a little bit about the Constitution. To understand belonging, we must first understand the Constitution itself, because the Constitution is not just a document. It is a social contract with the people of the Virgin Islands. The Constitution is a supreme legal framework which structures the relationship between the territory and the people it serves. Our Constitution plays a key role in defining who is legally recognized as a belonger and how civic rights operate. It also determines how rights are protected, how inclusion is defined, and how families secure their future across generations. And in talking about the Constitution, it is only fitting to incorporate in that human rights principles. And so constitutions do not exist in isolation. They are actually influenced by global standards, by global principles. So across the world, constitution systems are shaped by ideas like non-discrimination, equal protection before the law, family unity and stability, security of status, legal status. And so these principles are reflected in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this helps to shape global standards of fairness and justice. So let's talk a little bit about the 1976 Constitution, because the book Belonging and Identity starts off with the 1976 Constitution. So with that foundation in mind that I just laid, we can now look at how belonging was structured historically in the Virgin Islands. And the 1976 Constitution was created. It existed for over 30 years before the 2007 Constitution came in force. So the 1976 Constitution created one unified category in belonger. There were no subclasses of belonger, no generational restrictions on belonger status, and there were no ancestry-based limitations under the 1976 Constitution. So, once a person became a belonger under the 1976 Constitution, their status was equal, meaning that they enjoyed the same category of rights as other belongers. It was stable, and it was also inheritable, meaning that it could have been passed on to your children. It was also secure, meaning it formed a clear legal basis of planning lives. So belonging, regardless of how they acquired their status, persons acquired their status, they stood on the same constitutional footing under the 1976 Constitution. So over time, this created a reasonable expectation in people's minds about what belonging meant. So the 1976 Constitution granted belongers clear rights, including the right to vote, the right to stand for office, the right to reside and remain, and economic and social privileges. And so many people who became belongers before 2007 still carry the reasonable and legally recognized expectation that belonger rights are equal, stable, and inheritable. And so this expectation shaped major life decisions, and decisions such as family planning, migration choices, and investments, And also it shaped our identity. It also shaped decisions in long-term personal and economic decisions. So now that we've spoke about the 1976 Constitution, we will now move on to the 2007 Constitution. So as we know, constitutions do evolve. And in 2007, the Virgin Islands adopted a new constitutional framework which guides us today. With that new framework came structural adjustments in how identity was defined. And for the first time, the Constitution created a distinction between belonger and Virgin Islander. So under the 2007 Constitution, a Virgin Islander status is defined and tied primarily to birth, ancestral descent, and ancestral descent. It applies to belongers who are born in the Virgin Islands and have a parent or grandparent who is a belonger by birth or descent, or born abroad to a parent who is a belonger by descent. And by contrast, this means that belongers by marriage, belongers by grant, naturalized belongers, long resident belongers. So say even after perhaps 20, 30, 40 or 50 years of residency and contribution, and even though they are legally belongers, these individuals are not considered Virgin Islanders under the 2007 Constitution framework. So, the 2007 Constitution introduced distinctions within belonger status, which affect generational pathways and identity. And broadly, the framework now reflects two constitutional defined pathways of belonging. Belongers connected by birth or descent are eligible to be recognized Virgin Islanders, and generational transmission is constitutionally structured. And belongers connected by marriage, grant, or long residence are recognized fully as belongers, but they do not fall within the constitutional definition of a Virgin Islander. And the generational pathways operate differently. So, the result of the 2007 Constitution is a more detailed constitutional structure governing belonging and identity. So we can now look at how identity was restructured again in 2007. It reshaped how belonging and identity are defined in law. And in particular, there were greater emphasis which was placed on birth and descent. The constitutional term Virgin Islander was formally defined under the 2007 Constitution. And generational transmission of status became more specifically structured. So for some families, this represented a shift from the earlier unified framework which had existed under the 1976 Constitution. So understanding this structural evolution is essential to understanding constitutional development in the Virgin Islands. Now, why does any of this matter beyond technical language? Because constitutional definitions shape eligibility and generational transmission. And changes in legal languages can influence our identity, our long-term family planning, civic participation, civic expectation, and perceptions of stability. So in essence, constitutional reform is a part of an ongoing national conversation about identity, inclusion, and clarity when you really examine it. And I must reiterate that discussions around the Constitution, belonging and identity are not about blame. In fact, they are about understanding how legal frameworks evolve over time. So, why constitutions change? Now, no constitution remains frozen in time. Constitutions are living documents, and they evolve because communities grow, families become more diverse, economic conditions shift, social values mature, and very, very critical, our human rights standards are advancing. So, across the Caribbean and Commonwealth, constitutional reform have been used to remove discrimination. They have been used to correct unfair systems inherited from colonial rule. They have been used to strengthen rights for families, expand civic education and participation, and build a clearer national identity. So modern constitution is expected to expand protections, strengthen families, create clarity, and promote equality and social cohesion. It is one that aims to correct past inconsistencies. It's about progress. So we can now take a look at how other Caribbean nations approach national identity. Now, small island societies across the Caribbean have faced challenges like those confronting the Virgin Islands today. And there are several questions that are being asked. Who are the people? What does belonging in the truest sense mean? How do we build a unified national identity? How do we balance ancestry, descent, birth, and residence fairly? And how do we avoid internal divisions that weaken national unity? Let me briefly share how other Caribbean societies approach national identity. And my book, Belonging and Identity, have a number of Caribbean countries that I did some comparison, but today I'll just look at Barbados, and I'll also look at Jamaica. So Barbados created unity through one national identity. Barbados moved steadily from a colonial constitution toward republicanism. Barbados strengthened a clear, singular national identity, which is called Citizen of Barbados. And all citizens are widely known as Barbadians. So what you see is that different societies have approached identity in different ways. However, there's one theme that often appears, and that is clarity within citizenship. So, what Jamaica did? Jamaica's constitutional framework recognizes that national identity extends beyond geography. Its approach is rooted in inclusivity through descent and civic loyalty. Now, citizenship may be obtained in Jamaica by birth, descent, marriage, and naturalization. And so Jamaica also recognizes dual citizenship and does not restrict generational transmission of status. And we can touch a little bit on the Maroons of Jamaica. In terms of the Maroons, they are recognized in Jamaica as free people with certain cultural and land rights. However, even with this special historical status, the Jamaican Constitution maintains one unified class of citizenship. So the Maroons of Jamaica do not form a separate legal category of Jamaican nationals. In fact, their autonomy is cultural, historical, and respected. It is not a separate category of citizenship in their constitution. And it's only fitting that we define national identity. What do I mean by national identity? Now, at its core, national identity is a shared civic identity. It is a sense of belonging grounded in law, rights, and mutual recognition. It reflects the understanding that we belong to the same community, we share responsibility for the same home, we are protected by the same rights, we are moving toward the same future, and we recognize one another as equal members of the society. So, nations are built by creating one community with a shared purpose. National identity does not erase culture, it does not erase history, and it doesn't erase ancestry. What it does, it provides a legal and constitutional framework within which diversity can flourish. And as we just spoke about national identity, it is only fitting to speak about the stability of family stability. Because identity begins at home, within families. And families are the primary carriers of national identity. So, children learn who they are and where they belong first at home. A strong national identity protects families through clear and stable rights, equal treatment across generations, consistent rules that do not change unexpectedly, belonging that is respected, and laws that strengthen families. So the effects extend beyond law into emotional well-being, planning, and confidence when we start talking about belonging and identity and family stability. So, international standards, including those articulated by the United Nations, emphasize that self-determination depends on the free and genuine expression of the will of the people. A society is strongest when its people feel secure, respected, and confident in their legal status. Strengthening unity enhances internal harmony, institutional credibility, constitutional readiness, and our national confidence. So, building clarity and shared understanding supports the territory's long-term development. So, where does all this leave us? I believe that it leaves us with an opportunity. So, if the Virgin Islands chooses to strengthen its national identity, it can build a future grounded in one people, meaning different origins but shared destiny. One home, a place where belonging is equal, secure, and respected. One future, a future shaped with the people and not for them. And you may be asking, well, what is my role? What is the role of the people? Constitutional development is not the task of elected officials alone. It is a nation-building exercise which requires the participation of the people themselves. So every resident can contribute. We can contribute by learning the issues around us, knowing your rights, discussing respectfully, attending reform meetings, even submitting written views, and encouraging civic education in your family. And also, very important, supporting fair and thoughtful reform. So, the future of the Virgin Islands cannot be shaped for its people. It must be shaped with them. Every voice matters. And every voice deserves to be heard. Let me close with this. Belonging in the Virgin Islands is not a legal category, is not only a legal category. It is the foundation of dignity, stability, and shared destiny. It is shaped by history, by law, families, generational continuity, and civic participation. Constitutions evolve because societies evolve. Each generation inherits both the benefits and the responsibility of evolution. Now, our Constitution does more than define belonger status. It really shapes our identity. It shapes opportunities. And it shapes how families plan across generations. So, when we revisit past Virgin Islands history, I believe we are preparing ourselves wisely for the future ahead. So the strength of a nation lies in the confidence of its people, the stability of its families, and the fairness of its legal foundation. And our future here in the Virgin Islands will certainly be strongest when its people engage with knowledge, understanding, and a shared commitment to unity. That's my presentation. Thank you.